Welcome to Poirot's Mysteries, exploring the brilliance of Hercule Poirot's detective work.
Imagine a grand English estate, Marwood Hall, where the air hums with secrets and the shadows whisper of betrayal. A scream pierces the night, and a man lies dead, poisoned by cyanide in his own room. Was it a scorned lover, a desperate debtor, or a family member hiding a shameful past? Enter Hercule Poirot, the meticulous Belgian detective whose little gray cells unravel a web of lies, blackmail, and hidden motives. A lipstick-smeared glass, a cryptic note, a burned letter, and a mysterious photograph lead to a shocking truth. A murderer among the guests, driven by a decades-old promise broken. Can Poirot untangle the clues before the killer strikes again? Dive into this classic Agatha Christie-style mystery, where every glance hides a motive, every word conceals a lie, and the final twist will leave you breathless. Chapter 1: The Gathering at Marwood Hall. In the waning days of autumn, when the leaves of Sussex turned to flames of amber and crimson, Marwood Hall stood as a monument to an older, grander England. Its ivy-clad towers and mullioned windows gleamed under the pale October sun, exuding an air of timeless dignity. The estate, nestled in a secluded valley, was the ancestral home of the Ashbourne family, whose lineage stretched back to the days of the Tudors. Yet beneath its stately facade, a quiet unease simmered, as though the very stones of the hall whispered secrets to those who paused to listen. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful companion of Hercule Poirot, gazed out of the carriage window as it rattled along the winding drive. The invitation to Marwood Hall had come unexpectedly. A neatly penned letter from Lady Eleanor Ashbourne herself, requesting Poirot's presence for a weekend gathering. Hastings, ever eager for a respite from London's fog, had accepted with alacrity, though Poirot's response had been more reserved. "Mon ami," he had said, adjusting his impeccable tie. "One does not summon Hercule Poirot for mere pleasantries. There is always a reason, n'est-ce pas?" The carriage drew to a halt before the grand entrance, where a liveried footman stood ready to receive them. Hastings stepped down, his boots crunching on the gravel, and inhaled the crisp country air. Poirot followed, his small, precise steps betraying none of the curiosity that danced in his sharp green eyes. He adjusted his hat, a model of Parisian elegance, and surveyed the hall with the air of a man appraising a chessboard. "Magnifique," Poirot murmured, though whether he referred to the architecture or some private deduction, Hastings could not tell. Inside, the great hall was a study in opulence, polished oak paneling, a vast chandelier dripping with crystal, and a roaring fire that cast flickering shadows held the flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, how good of you to come," she said, her voice carrying the refined cadence of the aristocracy. "I trust your journey was pleasant?" "Most pleasant, Lady Ashbourne," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "But I confess I am intrigued by your invitation. It is not often that Hercule Poirot is summoned to such a charming retreat without a purpose." Lady Eleanor's smile faltered, but she recovered swiftly. "All in good time, Monsieur Poirot. For now, allow me to introduce you to our guests." The drawing room was a hive of polite chatter, the air thick with the scent of lavender and cigar smoke. Hastings surveyed the assembled company, a motley collection of personalities bound by wealth, ambition, or obligation. Sir Reginald Ashbourne, Lady Eleanor's husband, was a bluff, red-faced man whose hearty laugh seemed at odds with the tension in his eyes. Their daughter, Miss Clara Ashbourne, a pale beauty of 25, moved with a nervous grace, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Then there was Dr. Henry Mortimer, a physician whose scholarly air belied a sharp, watchful gaze. Beside him stood Mrs. Lavinia Mortimer, his wife, a vivacious woman whose laughter rang a touch too loudly. Mr. Julian Travers, a solicitor with a penchant for sharp suits and sharper words, lounged by the fireplace, his eyes darting to Clara with unsettling frequency. Miss Beatrice Langley, a distant cousin of the Ashbournes, sat primly, her embroidery needle flashing as she worked, her face a mask of quiet disapproval. Finally, there was Mr. Victor Crane, a stocky businessman with a coarse manner who seemed ill at ease in the refined surroundings. Dinner was a formal affair, served in a dining room aglow with candlelight. The conversation flowed smoothly, touching on politics, literature, and the latest London scandals, yet Hastings sensed an undercurrent of strain. Clara barely touched her food, her eyes fixed on her plate. Sir Reginald drank heavily, his laughter growing louder with each glass of claret. Lady Eleanor's attempts to steer the conversation were deft but strained, as though she feared what might surface if silence fell. Poirot, seated beside Hastings, observed it all with his characteristic calm. His fork moved with surgical precision, and his eyes missed nothing. "Observe, Hastings," he whispered during a lull. "How the glances travel, how the hands betray. There is a story here, waiting to be uncovered." After dinner, the party retired to the drawing room for coffee and brandy. Hastings, warming to the convivial atmosphere, engaged Dr. Mortimer in a discussion of military campaigns, while Poirot listened politely to Miss Langley's discourse on needlework. It was then that Lady Eleanor drew Poirot aside, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot," she said in a low voice, "I must—"
"Your expertise." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Naturellement, madame. Hercule Poirot is at your service. Shall we adjourn to the library?" The library was a cavernous room, its shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound volumes. Lady Eleanor closed the door behind them, her hands trembling slightly. "It is about my husband's brother, Mr. Lionel Ashbourne," she began. "He arrived unexpectedly this morning, claiming urgent family business, but his manner, it is strange, secretive. I fear he may be in trouble, or worse, that he may bring trouble to us." Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching. "Trouble, madame? Of what nature?" "I cannot say precisely," she admitted, "but there have been incidents. A missing letter, a whispered argument in the corridor, and tonight, at dinner, I saw him slip something into his pocket, a small vial, I believe. I fear for my family, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind was already at work. "Rest assured, madame, Hercule Poirot will observe. Tell me, where is Monsieur Lionel now?" "He retired early, claiming fatigue. His room is in the east wing, third door on the left." "Bon. I shall make inquiries. Discreetly. For now, return to your guests and act as though all is well. The little gray cells, they are already in motion." As Lady Eleanor left, Hastings joined Poirot, sensing the shift in his friend's demeanor. "What's afoot, Poirot? You've got that look in your eye." Poirot smiled faintly. "A puzzle, mon ami. A puzzle wrapped in shadows. We must tread carefully, for I suspect that Marwood Hall holds secrets far darker than a missing letter." The evening drew to a close, and the guests dispersed to their rooms. Hastings, weary from the journey, retired to his own chamber, a cozy room overlooking the gardens. Yet sleep eluded him. The creak of floorboards, the distant murmur of voices, and the oppressive weight of the hall's ancient walls kept him alert. He thought of Poirot, no doubt lying awake, his mind sifting through every word, every glance. At precisely 11:47 p.m., a scream shattered the silence. It was a woman's voice, high and piercing, echoing from the east wing. Hastings leapt from his bed, pulling on his dressing gown, and raced down the corridor. Other doors opened, and sleepy, alarmed faces appeared. Clara, pale as a ghost, Dr. Mortimer, clutching a medical bag, and Lady Eleanor, her composure frayed. They converged on the source of the scream, Lionel Ashbourne's room. The door stood ajar, and inside a ghastly scene awaited. Lionel lay sprawled across the floor, his guests crowded in, their faces a mixture of shock and suspicion. Hastings turned to Poirot, who stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Eleanor whispered, "you must help us. Who could have done this?" Poirot stepped forward, his eyes sweeping the room. "Fear not, madame. Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth. But first, we must preserve the scene. No one is to touch anything. The little gray cells. They require order." As the household descended into hushed chaos, Hastings knew one thing for certain. The quiet weekend at Marwood Hall had become a stage for murder. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Death. The air in Lionel Ashbourne's room hung heavy with the acrid tang of cyanide, a grim reminder of the violence that had shattered the tranquility of Marwood Hall. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked toward midnight, its steady rhythm a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted. Hercule Poirot stood at the threshold, his small, neat figure silhouetted against the flickering light of the corridor's gas lamps. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the scene with the precision of a watchmaker, noting every detail: the overturned glass, the faint smear of lipstick on its rim, the crumpled letter half hidden beneath the bed. Captain Hastings, still shaken by the scream that had roused him, hovered near Poirot, his mind racing. "Good heavens, Poirot," he whispered. "Cyanide. It's like something out of a penny dreadful. Who could have done this?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Patience, mon ami. The truth. It does not reveal itself in haste. We must observe. We must reflect. The little gray cells, they are already at work." The room was a study in disarray, a stark contrast to Poirot's preference for order. Lionel Ashbourne lay sprawled across the Persian rug, his face frozen in a rictus of pain. His evening attire, black tie, starched shirt, was crumpled, as though he had struggled in his final moments. The glass beside him, shattered into jagged shards, glinted in the candlelight. A small table held a decanter of brandy half empty, and a single cigarette case, its silver surface etched with the initials L.A. Lady Eleanor, her face ashen, stood clutching her daughter Clara, who trembled like a leaf. Sir Reginald, his earlier joviality replaced by a grim scowl, barked orders to the servants to fetch the local constable. Dr. Mortimer, ever the professional, examined the body with clinical detachment, though his hands shook slightly as he replaced his stethoscope. Mrs. Mortimer, her vivacity extinguished, clung to her husband's arm, her eyes wide with horror. Julian Travers, the solicitor, paced near the window, his sharp features taut with unease. Beatrice Langley, clutching her embroidery as though it were a talisman, muttered prayers under her breath. Victor Crane, the businessman's movements deliberate. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice calm yet commanding. "We are in the presence of a great tragedy. Monsieur Lionel Ashbourne has been taken from us, and it is my intention to discover how and why. I ask that no one leave this room until I have made my preliminary observations." Sir Reginald bristled. "See here, Poirot, I'm the master of this house. You can't just—" "Sir Reginald," Poirot interrupted, his tone polite but firm. "You desire the truth, no? Then permit Hercule Poirot to work. The police, they will come, but they will not see what I see. Now let us proceed with method." He began his examination, moving with the grace of a dancer. First, he knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the shards of glass. He sniffed the air, his mustache twitching. Cyanide, as Dr. Mortimer suggests. A swift and merciless poison. But how was it administered? The glass, it is broken. Yet the decanter... Untainted, I think. He lifted the decanter, sniffing its contents. Brandy, pure. No trace of the almond-like scent. Dr. Mortimer cleared his throat. The poison was likely in the glass itself, a small dose mixed with the brandy. He drank and... He gestured helplessly at the body. Poirot nodded. Perhaps. But the lipstick, doctor. It is curious, no? Monsieur Lionel, he did not wear such adornment. He'd pointed to the faint pink smear on the glass's rim, barely visible in the dim light. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Lipstick? But I never... Her voice faltered, and all eyes turned to her. Miss Ashbourne, Poirot said gently. You do not wear lipstick this evening, I observe. Yet someone did. And that someone shared the drink with Monsieur Lionel, perhaps? Clara shook her head vehemently. I was in my room after dinner. I didn't see Uncle Lionel after he retired. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, turning instead to the letter beneath the bed. He retrieved it with a handkerchief, unfolding it carefully. The paper was crumpled, the ink smudged, but the words were legible. You cannot hide forever. The debt must be paid. It was unsigned, the handwriting sharp and angular. A clue, Poirot murmured, slipping the letter into his pocket. But to what? A debt of money, of honor, or of blood? The arrival of Constable Hargreaves, a stout man with a walrus mustache, interrupted further speculation. He surveyed the scene with the air of a man out of his depth, his notebook trembling in his hands. Right then, he said gruffly. Murder evidence. Meddling? No. I preserve. I observe. I deduce. Poirot's smile was disarming, but his eyes gleamed with purpose. He turned to the guests, who stood in uneasy silence. I shall require a timeline of this evening's events. Who saw Monsieur Lionel last, and when? Let us establish the facts. Lady Eleanor spoke first, her voice steady, despite her pallor. Lionel retired at 10 o'clock, claiming fatigue. He said he wished to read in his room. And you, Sir Reginald? Poirot asked. The baronet shrugged. Saw him at dinner, same as everyone. He was quiet, kept to himself, didn't notice him slip away. Dr. Mortimer cleared his throat. I spoke with him briefly in the corridor at 10:15. He seemed agitated, said he had business to attend to. Mrs. Mortimer nodded. I saw him too, just before 10. He was carrying a cigarette case, I think. He looked nervous. Julian Travers interjected, his voice sharp. I didn't see him after dinner. I was in the billiard room with Crane until 11. Crane nodded curtly. Aye, that's right. We played a few frames. Didn't see Lionel. Miss Langley, her voice barely above a whisper, said, I was in the drawing room, working on my embroidery. I heard footsteps in the corridor around 10:30, but I didn't see who it was. Clara's voice trembled. I was in my room, reading. I heard nothing until the scream. Poirot listened, his head tilted, his fingers steepled. And who discovered the body? I did, Lady Eleanor said, her voice breaking. I couldn't sleep, so I went to check on Lionel. His door was ajar, and I found him like that. The time, madame. 11:47. Precisely. I looked at my watch. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging every word. Bon, we have a window, 10 o'clock to 11:47. Within this time, Monsieur Lionel was poisoned. But by whom? And why? He moved to the window, noting its latch was secure. No entry from outside,
The murderer. They were within these walls. His gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. And now, mes amis, I suggest we retire. The constable will guard the scene, and tomorrow, Hercule Poirot will begin his inquiries in earnest. As the guests dispersed, Hastings followed Poirot to his room, his mind awhirl. What do you make of it, Poirot? That letter, the lipstick, it's all so devilishly strange. Poirot adjusted his Poirot. The morning after Lionel Ashbourne's death dawned cold and gray, the sky over Marwood Hall heavy with the promise of rain. The great house, so grand in the golden light of the previous day, now seemed to crouch beneath a pall of suspicion. Captain Arthur Hastings, bleary-eyed from a restless night, stood at his window, watching the mist curl over the lawns. The events of the previous evening, the scream, the shattered glass, the bitter scent of cyanide, played in his mind like a grim reel of film. He dressed quickly, eager to join Poirot and make sense of the tragedy that had befallen their hosts. Downstairs, the breakfast room was a scene of strained civility. The guests sat in near silence, their faces drawn, their appetites diminished. Lady Eleanor, her eyes red-rimmed, presided over the table with a forced composure, while Sir Reginald glowered into his coffee, his usual bluster subdued. Clara, pale and silent, toyed with a piece of toast, her gaze distant. Dr. and Mrs. Mortimer exchanged hushed words, their expressions guarded. Julian Travers, the solicitor, read a newspaper with studied nonchalance, though his fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the table. Beatrice Langley, her embroidery abandoned, sipped tea with trembling hands, while Victor Crane, the businessman, ate heartily, as though determined to ignore the shadow of death. Hercule Poirot, however, was conspicuously absent. Hastings, accustomed to his friend's penchant for dramatic timing, was unsurprised when the door opened at precisely 9 o'clock and Poirot entered, immaculate in a tailored suit, his mustache gleaming with wax. His presence seemed to electrify the room, drawing every eye. He bowed slightly to Lady Eleanor, his expression one of serene confidence. "Bon matin, mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice clear and measured. "I trust you have slept, though perhaps not well. The events of last night, they weigh heavily, no?" Lady Eleanor managed a weak smile. "Monsieur Poirot, we are grateful for your presence. The constable has been diligent, but we look to you for answers." Poirot inclined his head. "And answers I shall provide, madame. But first, I must understand. Hercule Poirot does not guess. He observes, he deduces. Let us begin." He took a seat, accepting a cup of tea from a nervous maid. Hastings, seated beside him, marveled at his friend's composure. While the household reeled, Poirot seemed as calm as a man discussing the weather. Yet Hastings knew that beneath this placid exterior, the little gray cells were working furiously, sifting through every detail of the previous night. The arrival of Inspector Grayson, a lean, sharp-eyed man from the Sussex Constabulary, interrupted the uneasy breakfast. He was accompanied by nodding curtly. "Your reputation precedes you. I understand you've taken an interest in this case." Poirot's smile was disarming. "An interest, Inspector? No, it is a duty. A man is dead, and the truth, it must be found. I offer my services, if you permit." Grayson hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the allure of Poirot's expertise. "Very well," he said at last. "But this is my investigation. You'll share your findings. Understood?" "Naturellement," Poirot replied, his tone velvet smooth. "Hercule Poirot is always cooperative." With the formalities dispensed, Poirot requested a tour of the crime scene, now cordoned off by Hargreaves' men. The guests were instructed to remain in the drawing room,
under the watchful eye of a young constable. Hastings followed Poirot and Grayson to the east wing, where Lionel's room remained untouched, save for the chalk outline marking the body's position. Poirot moved with methodical precision, his eyes darting from the shattered glass to the decanter, from the cigarette case to the crumpled letter he had pocketed the night before. He knelt by the chalk outline, his fingers tracing the air above the rug. "The position of the body," he murmured. "It suggests a struggle, perhaps. But the glass, broken after the poison took effect, I think." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting he dropped it as he fell?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone non-committal. "Or perhaps it was broken deliberately, to obscure something. The lipstick, Inspector, did you note it?" Grayson nodded, producing a small evidence bag containing the glass shards. "We did. No one's admitted to wearing lipstick last night, though. Miss Ashbourne and Mrs. Mortimer both deny it, and Miss Langley claims she never uses the stuff." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet it is there, a detail that does not lie. We must ask ourselves who wished to conceal their presence in this room." He turned to the cigarette case, lifting it with a handkerchief. The initials L.A. glinted in the morning light. "Lionel Ashbourne, oui. But why only one cigarette remains? A man of his habits, he would have more, no?" Hastings frowned. "Perhaps he smoked them all?" Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami, the room it does not smell of tobacco, only of cyanide and brandy. This case, it is curious." He opened the case, revealing a single cigarette and a tiny scrap of paper tucked inside. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a scrawled note. "Midnight, the library." Grayson leaned in. "A rendezvous? With whom?" "That, Inspector, is the question," Poirot said, slipping the note into his pocket alongside the letter. Began. "You said last night that you found Monsieur Lionel at 11:47. You are certain of the time?" She nodded. "My watch is precise. I checked it as I entered the corridor." "And you saw no one else?" "No one. The house was quiet save for a faint sound, like a door closing just before I reached his room." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A door, you say? In which direction?" "Toward the west wing, I think, but it was faint." Next, he turned to Clara, whose pallor had deepened. "Mademoiselle, you were in your room all evening. You heard nothing, saw nothing?" Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting her handkerchief. I thought I heard footsteps around 10:30, but I was reading and I wasn't sure." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. "And your uncle, he was close to you?" She nodded, tears welling. "He was kind, always, but lately he seemed troubled. He wouldn't say why." One by one, Poirot questioned the others. Sir Reginald admitted to a brief argument with Lionel over family finances at 9:30, but claimed he'd retired to his study afterward. Dr. Mortimer reiterated his encounter at 10:15, adding that Lionel had seemed distracted, almost fearful. Mrs. Mortimer confirmed her sighting at 10, noting that Lionel had clutched the cigarette case tightly, as though protecting it. Travers and Crane repeated their alibi of billiards, corroborated by a servant who had brought them drinks at 10:45. Beatrice Langley, her voice quavering, insisted she had heard nothing but footsteps, though she now recalled a faint rustle outside the drawing room at 11. Poirot listened, his face impassive, but Hastings could see the wheels turning. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" he asked as they stepped into the corridor for a moment's respite. Poirot adjusted his tie, his expression thoughtful. "A tapestry of half-truths, mon ami. The alibis, they overlap, yet there are gaps. The cigarette case, the lipstick, the letter, the note.
They are threads, and we must weave them together. But one thing is clear, this was no random act. The murderer, they planned, they waited, they struck. As they returned to the drawing room, a maid entered, her face pale.
Monsieur Poirot, sir, there's something you should see in the library. Poirot's eyes gleamed.
The library, you say? Lead on, mademoiselle. In the vast, shadowy library, the maid pointed to a desk where a single sheet of paper lay, half hidden beneath a blotter. Poirot lifted it, revealing a list of names, every guest at Marwood Hall, including Lionel's, with a single word beside his. Debt. Hastings gasped. Good Lord, leather seemed to absorb the weight of the discovery Poirot held in his gloved hands. The list of names, each a guest at the hall, with the word debt scrawled beside Lionel Ashburn's, lay on the desk like a silent accusation. Hercule Poirot's sharp green eye studied it, his mustache twitching as his mind sifted through the implications. Captain Hastings, standing at his side, felt a chill that had little to do with the morning's damp air. The maid who had led them to the desk hovered nervously by the door, her hands twisting in her apron. Mon ami, Poirot said softly, folding the paper and slipping it into his pocket with the other clues. This is no mere list. It is a map of motives perhaps, but to where and to whom we must discover. Inspector Grayson, who had followed them to the library, frowned. It's damning evidence, Poirot. A list like that found in a dead man's orbit. It suggests someone had a grudge, but why leave it here? Poirot tilted his head, his expression serene yet piercing. Why indeed, Inspector? A careless mistake? Or a deliberate taunt? The murderer, they play a game with us, no? But Hercule Poirot, he does not lose at games of the mind. They returned to the drawing room, where the guests sat in uneasy silence, watched by the young constable. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion, each glance a silent question, each fidget a potential confession. Poirot took his place at the center of the room, his small stature commanding attention as effectively as a general's. He clasped his hands behind his back, his voice clear and precise. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, a man is dead, and the truth, it hides among you. I shall ask questions and I expect answers, truthful answers. The little gray cells, they demand clarity. Let us begin with the events of last night, in detail. He turned first to Sir Reginald, whose ruddy face had lost some of its color. Sir Reginald, you spoke of an argument with your brother at 9:30. What was its nature? Sir Reginald shifted in his chair, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. Family matters, he said gruffly. Lionel had been reckless with money, debts, investments gone sour. I told him he needed to sort himself out. He didn't take kindly to it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And where were you after this argument, between 10 and 11:47? In my study, working on accounts alone. Sir Reginald's tone was defiant, but his eyes flickered to his wife, gentle but probing. And you heard footsteps at 10:30, oui? From which direction? Clara hesitated, her fingers shredding her handkerchief. I think from the east wing, toward Uncle Lionel's room, but it was faint and I wasn't certain. Poirot turned to Dr. Mortimer, whose scholarly air seemed strained under the weight of scrutiny. Doctor, you saw Monsieur Lionel at 10:15. He was agitated, you said. Did he mention a specific concern? Dr. Mortimer adjusted his glasses, his voice steady but careful. He spoke vaguely of a business matter, something about a contract gone wrong. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. I assumed it was financial. Mrs. Mortimer, her vivacity muted, added, "I saw him at 10, as I said. He was clutching that cigarette case so tightly I thought he might dent it. He seemed frightened, almost." Poirot's gaze shifted to Julian Travers, whose sharp features were taut with unease. "Monsieur Travers, you and Monsieur Crane played billiards until 11. Did you hear or see anything unusual?" Travers shrugged, his nonchalance forced. "Nothing out of the ordinary. The house was quiet, save for the usual creaks. Crane and I were focused on the game." Crane nodded, his coarse voice gruff. "Aye, just billiards. Didn't hear a thing until the scream." Miss Beatrice Langley, her embroidery lying forgotten in her lap, spoke softly. "I heard footsteps at 11, as I told you, Monsieur Poirot. They were heavy, like a man's, coming from the corridor outside the drawing room." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Heavy, you say? And yet Mademoiselle Clara heard footsteps at 10:30, lighter, perhaps. 2 sets of footsteps, 2 times. Curious, no?" He paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the rug. "Let us consider the objects. The cigarette case with its single cigarette and hidden note. Midnight, the library, the letter demanding a debt be paid. The lipstick on the glass, which no one claims. And now, this list, with all your names and one word beside Monsieur Lionel's. Debt. These are not random, mes amis. They are pieces of a puzzle, and Hercule Poirot will fit them together." Inspector Grayson, taking notes, interjected. "We have searched the room further, Poirot. Found a small key under the bed, likely for a lockbox or safe. Any ideas?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "A key, you say? Most interesting. We must find what it unlocks. Perhaps it holds the secret." Voice low and reluctant. "Lionel owed me money. A business deal. £10,000 invested in a venture that collapsed. He promised to repay me this weekend." Poirot's eyebrows rose. £10,000, Monsieur Crane? A significant sum? And you discussed this with him?" Crane nodded. "At dinner, briefly. He said he'd have the funds soon, but he was cagey about how." Poirot's gaze swept the room. "Anyone else? Debts, they are not always of money. Secrets, betrayals, these too are debts." No one spoke, but the air crackled with unspoken truths. Poirot clapped his hands, breaking the tension. "Very well. I shall continue my inquiries. Inspector, I suggest we examine the servants' quarters and the rest of the East Wing. The key, the footsteps, they will lead us somewhere." As the group dispersed, Hastings caught Poirot's arm. "What do you make of it, Poirot? Crane's admission? It's a motive, surely." Poirot smiled faintly. "A motive, yes, but one among many, mon ami. The lipstick, the note, the list, they point to a deeper game. Someone in this house is hiding more than a debt. They are hiding a plan." They followed Grayson to the servants' quarters, where the maid who had found the list, Annie, awaited. She was young, her eyes wide with fear. "I didn't mean to snoop, sir," she said, twisting her apron. "I was dusting the library this morning, and the paper, it fell from the blotter." Poirot's voice was gentle. "You did well, mademoiselle. Tell me, did you see anyone in the library last night?" Annie hesitated. I saw Mr. Travers there, around 10:45. He was looking through some books, but he left when he saw me." Poirot's eyes gleamed.
Merci, Annie. You have been most helpful. As they left the servants' quarters, Hastings whispered, Travers in the library? That's where the note said to meet at midnight. Précisément, Poirot said. And yet he claims to have been playing billiards. A contradiction, no? The little grey cells, they are beginning to see the pattern. The rain began to fall as they returned to the hall, the drops pattering against the windows like the ticking of a clock. Hastings felt the weight of the mystery pressing down, but Poirot's calm certainty was a beacon in the gloom. The questions had begun, and with them, the unraveling of Marwood Hall's secrets. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The rain that had threatened Marwood Hall all morning now fell in earnest, a steady drumbeat against the ancient windows, cloaking the estate in a grey veil. Inside, the drawing room was a cauldron of tension, the guests' faces etched with unease as they awaited Poirot's next move. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated, mustache a perfect crescent of calm authority. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the murmur of rain. We are gathered to unravel a crime most heinous. Monsieur Lionel Ashbourne is dead, poisoned by cyanide in his own room. The clues, the lipstick, the letter, the note, the list, they point to a truth hidden among you. But there are also shadows, distractions, what the English call red herrings. Today we shall separate truth from deception. Inspector Grayson, standing by the door with his notebook, nodded curtly. We've got a solid lead, Poirot. Victor Crane admitted to a financial motive. £10,000 is no small sum, and his alibi with Travers in the billiard room doesn't cover the whole window of the murder. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Précisément, Inspector. Monsieur Crane's debt is a motive, oui, but motives, they are like footprints in the sand. Many lead nowhere. Let us examine this alibi more closely. He turned to Victor Crane, whose broad shoulders seemed to slump under the weight of scrutiny. Monsieur Crane, you and Monsieur Travers played billiards from 10 to 11, oui? Yet the maid, Annie, places Monsieur Travers in the library at 10:45. How do you explain this? Crane's face reddened, his coarse features tightening. I don't know about that. I was at the billiard table, potting balls. Travers stepped out for a moment, said he needed air. Didn't think much of it. Julian Travers, his sharp features paling, interjected. That's nonsense. I never left the billiard room. The maid must be mistaken. Poirot tilted his head, his gaze piercing. Mistaken, Monsieur Travers? Annie is quite certain. She saw you in the library searching the shelves, and the note in Monsieur Lionel's cigarette case spoke of a meeting in the library at midnight. Were you planning to meet him? Travers' eyes darted to the floor. I told you. I was with Crane. I didn't go to the library. The girl's confused. Poirot's smile was thin. Confused, perhaps. But the truth, it has a way of emerging. Let us consider another matter. The key found under Monsieur Lionel's bed. Inspector, have you located what it unlocks? Grayson shook his head. Not yet. We've searched his room and the library. No lockbox, no safe. It's a small key, likely for something personal. Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly against his chin. A personal lock, oui? Perhaps a diary, a case, a secret compartment. We must continue to search. But for now, let us return to the night of the murder. Mademoiselle Clara, you heard footsteps at 10:30. Describe them, s'il vous plaît. Clara, her face pale as porcelain, hesitated. They were soft, quick, like someone trying not to be heard.
Room. Could they have been the same? Beatrice's needle paused, her eyes wide. I don't think so. The ones I heard were deliberate, like a man's boots, not sneaky but purposeful. Poirot's mustache twitched. 2 sets of footsteps, 2 different times, 2 different characters. The plot, it thickens, no? He paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the rug. Let us consider the lipstick.
No one claims it, yet it adorns the glass from which Monsieur Lionel drank his fatal dose. Madame Mortimer, you are known for your elegance. Do you ever wear such a shade?" Mrs. Mortimer's laugh was brittle. "Monsieur Poirot, I haven't worn lipstick in years. It's far too garish for my taste." Poirot's eyes flicked to Clara, then to Lady Eleanor, both of whom shook their heads. "Curious," he murmured. "A phantom lady, perhaps, or a deliberate misdirection." Inspector Grayson cleared his throat. "There's another matter, Poirot. We found a vial in the servants' quarters. Empty, but it smells of cyanide. One of the maids, Annie, admitted to handling it. Says she found it in the corridor near Lionel's room and picked it up, thinking it was dropped by accident." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Annie again? Most interesting. Bring her in, Inspector." The maid was summoned, her face pale and her hands trembling. "I didn't mean no harm, sir," she stammered. "I found the vial on the floor near Mr. Lionel's door, around 10:50. I thought it was medicine or perfume, so I took it to the servants' hall to show Mrs. Bates, the housekeeper." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "And what did Mrs. Bates say?" "She told me to put it back where I found it, but I was scared, so I kept it in my pocket until this morning. I swear I didn't know it was poison." Poirot studied her, his gaze softening. "You have done well to tell the truth, mademoiselle. But tell me, did you see anyone near Monsieur Lionel's room when you found the vial?" Annie hesitated, her eyes darting to the guests. I saw Mr. Travers in the corridor just before. He was coming from the east wing, looking flustered." Travers leapt to his feet. "That's a lie! I was in the billiard room, I tell you!" Crane growled. "Sit down, Travers. You did step out. Don't make it worse by lying." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough. Monsieur Travers, your alibi, it crumbles. You were seen in the library, and now near Monsieur Lionel's room. You must explain yourself." Travers sank back into his chair, his face ashen. I went to the library to fetch a book. I didn't see Lionel, I swear. I was back in the billiard room by 11. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "We shall see, monsieur. The truth, it is like a mirror,
Designed to distract. But Hercule Poirot sees through them. The murderer, they are clever but not clever enough. I shall ask each of you to provide a written account of your movements last night, from 9 to midnight. Every detail, no matter how small." As the guests complied, their pens scratching in uneasy silence, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "You're stirring the pot, old chap. Travers looks guilty as sin." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Guilty, perhaps, but of what? A lie, a secret, or murder? The red herrings, they swim in schools, mon ami. We must catch the true fish." The written accounts were collected and Poirot retired to the library to study them, Hastings at his side. The papers revealed little new save for minor discrepancies. Sir Reginald claimed to have heard a door slam at 10:40, which no one else mentioned. Mrs. Mortimer noted a faint scent of perfume in the corridor at 10, which she hadn't mentioned before. Poirot's fingers tapped the desk, his mind a whirlwind of connections. "The vial," he murmured, "found at 10:50, yet the poison took effect later. The lipstick, unclaimed. The key, still a mystery. And the list, why was it left so carelessly?" Hastings frowned. "You think it's a plant, Poirot, to throw us off?" "Perhaps," Poirot said. "Or perhaps it is a challenge. The murderer, they wish to test Hercule Poirot, but they will find that I am not so easily misled." As the rain continued to fall, the hall seemed to close in around them, its shadows deepening. Hastings felt a growing certainty that the truth was near, yet maddeningly out of reach. Poirot, however, remained serene, his little grey cells weaving a net to catch the killer among the red herrings. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The rain had settled into a persistent drizzle, cloaking Marwood Hall in a mist that blurred the edges of its ancient stones. Inside, the atmosphere was no less oppressive. the weight of Lionel Ashburn's murder pressing down on the household like a physical force. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the library with Hercule Poirot, felt the tension coiling tighter with each passing hour. The written accounts of the guests' movements lay spread across the desk, a mosaic of half-truths and contradictions. Poirot, his small hands folded neatly, studied them with the intensity of a scholar deciphering an ancient text. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low and precise. "We are at a turning point. The red herrings, they swim in abundance, but now we have found a clue, a small detail, but one that shines like a beacon in the fog." Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What is it, Poirot? Something in the accounts?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Not in the accounts, Hastings, but wing," where Constable Hargreaves stood guard outside Lionel's room. Inspector Grayson, poring over his notebook in the corridor, looked up as they approached. "Back again, Poirot. Found something new?" "Perhaps, Inspector," Poirot replied, his tone enigmatic. "Hercule Poirot does not overlook the small things. Permit me to examine the room once more." The room was as they had left it, the chalk outline of Lionel's body a grim reminder of the night's tragedy. The shattered glass, the decanter, the cigarette case, all remained untouched, preserved for the investigation. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his eyes scanning every surface. He paused by the small table where the decanter stood, his fingers hovering over a faint mark in the dust, a circular indentation, barely visible. "Voila," he murmured, pointing to the mark. "A glass, perhaps, or a cup, placed here and then removed. But why? The broken glass. It was on the floor. This mark, it suggests another vessel, one that has vanished." Grayson frowned, crouching to inspect the mark. "Could be a servant cleaned it away before we secured the scene." Poirot shook his head. "No, Inspector. The servants, they were instructed not to touch this room after the body was found. This mark, it was made before the murder, I think, and it tells us something vital. The murderer, they were careful, but not careful enough." Hastings, puzzled, ventured, "You think there was another glass here? One the murderer took to hide their traces?" "Précisément," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The glass with the lipstick, it was the one broken. Oui. But this mark suggests a second glass, perhaps used to deliver the cyanide. The murderer removed it, but left this trace. A mistake, Hastings, and mistakes are the downfall of even the cleverest criminal." Poirot turned his attention to the cigarette case, lifting it once more with his handkerchief. The single cigarette inside rolled slightly, revealing a faint smudge on its paper, a trace of ink, blue and slightly blurred. "Another detail," Poirot said, holding it to the light. "This cigarette, it has been handled, perhaps marked, and the note inside. Midnight, the library, it matches the ink of the list we found. The same hand, perhaps?" Grayson's eyes narrowed. "You're saying the same person wrote the note and the list? That narrows it down." Poirot inclined his head. "It suggests, Inspector, but it does not prove. We must tread carefully. The murderer, they weave a web of deception, but the threads, they begin to fray." They returned to the drawing room. "Ink. These are small things, but to Hercule Poirot they are signposts to the truth. I ask now for your cooperation. Who among you handled Monsieur Lionel's cigarette case last night?" A murmur rippled through the room. Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "I saw him with it at dinner, but I didn't touch it. Lionel was particular about his things." Clara's voice was barely audible. "He showed it to me once, earlier in the week. It was a gift from our father, he said, but I didn't touch it last night."
Mrs. Mortimer, her usual vivacity subdued, spoke up. I noticed it in his hand when I saw him at 10. He was fidgeting with it, like it was a talisman. Poirot's gaze lingered on her. And you, madame, did you see anyone else near his room that night? She hesitated, her eyes flicking to her husband. No one. Just Lionel. Dr. Mortimer, sensing the scrutiny, adjusted his glasses. I told you. I spoke to him at 10:15. He had the case then, but I didn't touch it. Julian Travers, his sharp features tense, said nothing, but his fingers drummed on the arm of his chair. Victor Crane, his coarse voice gruff, muttered, Didn't see the blasted thing after dinner. I was with Travers, as I said. Beatrice Langley, her embroidery clutched like a shield, whispered, I saw him put it in his pocket at dinner, but I was in the drawing room all evening. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing every word. And the vial, found by Annie near Monsieur Lionel's room. Who among you has knowledge of cyanide? It is not a common substance, no? Dr. Mortimer spoke up, his tone professional. As a physician, I'm familiar with it. It's used in small doses for certain treatments, but it's highly controlled. I don't carry it if that's what you're implying. Poirot's smile was polite but probing. I imply nothing, Doctor. I merely seek the truth. And you, Monsieur Crane, your business, it involves chemicals, oui? Crane bristled. Mining equipment, not poisons. I don't deal in that sort of thing. Poirot's eyes swept the room. Very well, I shall continue my inquiries, but know this. The clue in the dust, the smudge of ink, they point to someone in this house. The truth, it cannot hide forever. As the guests dispersed, Hastings followed Poirot to the library, where he spread out the clues, the letter, the note, the list, and now a sketch of the dust mark he had drawn with meticulous care. What does it mean, Poirot? Hastings asked. A second glass, a smudged cigarette. It's also fragmented. Poirot's fingers tapped the desk. Fragmented, oui, but not without pattern. The second glass, it was removed to conceal the method of the poison. The cigarette, it was marked, perhaps to signal something. Lionel. A knock at the door interrupted them. Annie, the maid, entered, her face pale. Monsieur Poirot, I remembered something. Last night, when I found the vial, I saw a shadow in the corridor just for a moment. It was near Mr. Lionel's door before I picked it up. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A shadow, mademoiselle? Describe it. It was tall, I think. A man, maybe. But it was gone so quick I couldn't be sure. Merci, Annie. You have been most helpful. As she left, Hastings whispered, A tall shadow. Travers? Crane? Sir Reginald? Poirot's smile was grim. Oh, none of them, mon ami. The clue in detail, it leads us closer, but the web is still tangled. We must proceed with care, for the murderer watches us, even now. The rain continued to fall, and Marwood Hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Poirot's next move. Chapter 7. More lies surface. The drizzle outside Marwood Hall had thickened into a steady rain, casting a mournful veil over the estate. Inside, the air was heavy with suspicion, each guest a shadow of their former self, their polite facades crumbling under the weight of Lionel Ashbourne's murder. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the library with Hercule Poirot, felt the oppressive atmosphere like a tightening noose. The clues, the lipstick-smeared glass, the cryptic note, the list with its ominous debt, the faint mark in the dust, lay scattered across the desk, a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with each revelation. Poirot, his small frame radiating calm authority, studied the sketch of the dust mark with intense focus. His mustache twitched, a sign that his little gray cells were weaving connections invisible to others. Mon ami, he said, his voice low.
The truth, it begins to emerge, like a photograph developing in the dark room. But there are lies yet to be uncovered. Lies of the heart, lies of the past. Hastings, ever eager for clarity, leaned forward. "You've found something new, Poirot? The dust mark, the cigarette, do they point to someone?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "They point, Hastings, but not yet to a name. They point to a story of betrayal, perhaps, or of vengeance. We must dig deeper, for the lies, they are piling up like leaves in autumn." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock. Inspector Grayson entered, his lean face etched with frustration. "Poirot, we've searched the house for that key you found under Lionel's bed. No lockbox, no safe, nothing. But one of the footmen reported something odd. Mrs. Mortimer was seen in the East Wing corridor at 10:20 last night. Not 10, as she claimed." Her composure fraying, clutched a teacup as though it were an anchor. Clara, pale and silent, stared at the floor, her handkerchief in tatters. Sir Reginald's bluster had given way to a sullen scowl, while Dr. Mortimer's scholarly air seemed strained. Julian Travers, his sharp features taut, avoided Poirot's gaze, and Victor Crane's coarse demeanor was tempered by a nervous fidgeting. Beatrice Langley, her embroidery abandoned, whispered prayers under her breath. Poirot took his place at the center of the room, his small stature commanding as ever. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and deliberate. "The investigation, it progresses, but there are discrepancies, lies that obscure the truth. Madame Mortimer, I must ask you to clarify your movements last night." Mrs. Mortimer's head snapped up, her vivacity replaced by a flicker of panic. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot. I saw Lionel at 10, in the corridor. I was on my way to my room." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes piercing. "Yet a footman places you in the East Wing at 10:20, near Monsieur Lionel's room. Why did you not mention this?" Her cheeks flushed, and she glanced at her husband, who stiffened. I must have misremembered the time. I did pass through the East Wing, yes, to fetch a shawl from my room. It was a brief errand." Dr. Mortimer's voice was sharp. "Lavinia, you didn't mention a shawl. You said you went straight to bed." She faltered, her hands twisting in her lap. "I didn't think it mattered, Henry. It was a trivial thing." Poirot's smile was polite, but unrelenting. "Trivial, madame? In a murder investigation, nothing is trivial. Tell me, did you see anyone else in the corridor at 10:20? Mrs. Mortimer hesitated, her eyes darting to Travers. I saw Mr. Travers, coming from the direction of the library. He seemed in a hurry." Travers leapt to his feet, his face pale. "That's a lie. I was in the billiard room with Crane, as I've said a dozen times," Crane's voice rumbled. "You did step out, Travers. Don't deny it. But I didn't see Mrs. Mortimer, so I can't say what she was up to." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough. The contradictions, they multiply. Monsieur Travers, Madame Mortimer, your stories do not align. And there is more. Another lie, I suspect, concerning Monsieur Lionel's debts." He turned to Sir Reginald, whose scowl deepened. "Sir Reginald, you spoke of your brother's financial troubles. But there is more, no? A family secret, perhaps, that you have not shared." Sir Reginald's face reddened, his fists clenching. "What are you implying, Poirot? Lionel was Lionel. He wasn't just in debt to Crane. He owed money to a man in London. A dangerous man. A moneylender named Carver. Lionel said he'd settle it this weekend, but he wouldn't say how." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Carver, you say? And you did not think this relevant, Sir Reginald?" "I thought it was Lionel's mess to clean up," he muttered. "Didn't want to drag the family name through the mud." Poirot turned to Clara, whose eyes were wide with fear. "Mademoiselle,
did your uncle mention this cava to you? Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. No, but he did say something odd a few days ago. He said, the past always catches up, Clara. Debts must be paid one way or another. I thought he meant money, but now... Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was racing. Merci, mademoiselle. Your honesty, it is a light in the darkness. He turned to the group, his voice rising slightly. A moneylender, a shadow in the corridor, a missing glass, a smudged cigarette. These are not mere details. They are the threads of a tapestry, woven by a murderer who believes they can outwit Hercule Poirot. But they are mistaken. Inspector Grayson, taking notes, spoke up. We've interviewed the servants again. The housekeeper, Mrs. Bates, says she saw Miss Langley in the East Wing at 10:40, not in the drawing room as she claimed. Beatrice Langley gasped, her needle falling to the floor. That's not true. I was in the drawing room, working on my embroidery. Mrs. Bates must be confused. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Confused, mademoiselle? Or perhaps you were seen where you did not wish to be. What were you doing in the East Wing? Beatrice's face flushed, her voice barely audible. I went to fetch a book from the library. I didn't want to admit it because I saw something I shouldn't have. The room fell silent, every eye on her. Poirot's voice was gentle, but insistent. And what did you see, mademoiselle? Beatrice's hands trembled. I saw Mr. Travers and Mrs. Mortimer talking in whispers near the library door. They didn't see me, but I heard Mr. Travers say, "It has to be tonight, or it's all over." Travers and Mrs. Mortimer both protested, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of denial. Poirot raised a hand, his expression stern. Silence! The lies they unravel. Monsieur Travers, Madame Mortimer, you have much to explain. But for now, I ask you all to remain in the hall. The truth, it is close, and Hercule Poirot will find it. As the guests dispersed, their faces a mixture of fear and suspicion, Hastings followed Poirot to the
key, the lock it opens, and the heart of this crime. The rain continued to fall, and Marwood Hall seemed to pulse with secrets, each lie a step closer to the killer's identity. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The rain had become a relentless torrent, battering the ancient walls of Marwood Hall and casting a gloomy pall over its inhabitants. Inside, the drawing room was a crucible of raw emotion, the guests' carefully maintained facades cracking under the strain of Hercule Poirot's relentless probing. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fire, felt the atmosphere shift, as though the very air trembled with the weight of secrets about to spill. Poirot, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, surveyed the assembled company with his sharp green eyes, his mustache a perfect arc of calm authority. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the patter of rain. We stand at a crossroads. Lies have been uncovered, lies of time, of place, of motive. But now, we approach the heart of this tragedy. Someone among you holds a truth that cannot be hidden much longer. I ask you to speak, before the little gray cells force the matter. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the distant rumble of thunder. Lady Eleanor, her composure fraying like a worn tapestry, clutched her teacup, her knuckles white. Clara, her face a mask of anguish, stared at her hands, her handkerchief reduced to shreds. Sir Reginald's scowl had deepened into something akin to despair, while Dr. Mortimer's scholarly detachment seemed to waver. Mrs. Mortimer, her vivacity long gone, avoided her husband's gaze. Julian Travers, his sharp features taut, sat rigid as though bracing for a blow. Victor Crane's coarse demeanor was tempered by a nervous tic in his jaw, and Beatrice Langley's prayers had given way to silent tears. Poirot's gaze settled on Mrs. Mortimer, whose earlier denial of an encounter with Travers had been contradicted by Beatrice's revelation. "Madame Mortimer," he said, his tone gentle but unyielding. "You were heard in the library with Monsieur Travers, speaking of a plan that must be tonight. What was this plan, and why did you conceal it?" Mrs. Mortimer's lips trembled, her eyes darting to her husband. I didn't want to cause trouble. It wasn't what you think, Monsieur Poirot. Julian, Mr. Travers, was helping me with a private matter." Dr. Mortimer's voice was icy. "A private matter, Lavinia? In whispers, at night, with another man? Explain yourself." Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her—
What did he know?
She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks.
It doesn't matter now. I begged Julian to help me convince Lionel to stay silent. We were going to meet him in the library at midnight to offer him money, but he was already dead when I went to his room.
Poirot's eyes narrowed.
You went to his room, madame?
When? Mrs. Mortimer's voice broke.
At 11:30. I couldn't wait until midnight. I knocked, but there was no answer. The door was ajar and I saw him lying there. I panicked and ran back to my room.
Travers, his face ashen, nodded reluctantly.
It's true. I was going to meet Lionel with her to settle things, but I swear I didn't go to his room. I was in the library, waiting, until I heard the scream. Poirot's mustache twitched. And yet, Madame Mortimer, you did not mention this visit to Monsieur Lionel's room. Why? I was afraid, she sobbed. Afraid you'd think I killed him. I didn't. I swear I didn't. Dr. Mortimer rose, his face a mixture of anger and pain. Lavinia, how could you keep this from me? If Lionel was blackmailing you, why didn't you tell me? She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I was ashamed, Henry. I thought I could handle it. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. This revelation, it is significant, but it is not the whole truth. Monsieur Travers, you were seen in the corridor near Monsieur Lionel's room at 10:50 by the maid Annie. You deny this, yet your presence in the library and now this admission, it suggests you were closer to the crime than you claim. Travers' eyes flashed with defiance. I told you I was in the library. I didn't go near his room. The maid's mistaken. Poirot's smile was thin. Mistaken, perhaps. But the truth, it has a way of surfacing, like a bubble in still water. He turned to Clara, whose tears had begun to fall silently. Mademoiselle Clara, your uncle spoke of debts, of the past catching up. Did he ever hint at blackmail, at secrets he held over others? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. He was different these past weeks. He'd make strange comments, like he knew things about people. Once he said to me, Clara, people think they can bury their sins, but I see them. I didn't know what he meant, but it frightened me. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was racing. Merci, mademoiselle. Your words, they add another piece to the puzzle. Inspector Grayson, who had been listening intently, spoke up. We found something else, Poirot. In the fireplace of the library there were ashes, burned paper, with fragments of handwriting that matched the list we found. Careless.
He turned to Beatrice Langley, whose tears had ceased, replaced by a look of quiet resolve. Mademoiselle Langley, you saw Madame Mortimer and Monsieur Travers in the library. Did you see anyone else? Perhaps someone burning papers? Beatrice hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. I didn't want to say, because it seemed so trivial, but I saw Sir Reginald in the library earlier, around 10. He was standing by the fireplace, holding a letter. I thought he was just warming his hands, but now— Sir Reginald's face reddened, his voice booming. That's absurd! I was in my study as I told you. I didn't burn anything. Lady Eleanor touched his arm, her voice pleading. Reginald, please. If you know something, tell Monsieur Poirot, for Lionel's sake. Sir Reginald's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked defeated. All right, he muttered. I did go to the library, but only to fetch a book. I saw a letter on the desk. Lionel's handwriting, I thought. I burned it. It was about family matters, things I didn't want dragged up. Poirot's voice was sharp. And what were these matters, Sir Reginald? He hesitated, his eyes darting to his wife. It was about Clara's inheritance. Lionel wanted to contest it, said she wasn't entitled to her share.
I burned it to protect her. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Father, why didn't you tell me? I didn't want you worried, he said gruffly. It was Lionel's nonsense, nothing more. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. Nonsense, Sir Reginald. Or a motive for murder. The list, the letter, the blackmail. These are not coincidences. They are the threads of a tapestry, and the pattern, it is almost clear. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelations pressing down. Hastings, his heart pounding, leaned toward Poirot. Good Lord, Poirot. Blackmail, burned letters, contested inheritances. It's a nest of vipers. Poirot's smile was grim. A nest, oui, but one we shall untangle. The emotional truth. It has broken through, and with it, the murderer's mask begins to slip. As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with guilt and fear, Poirot turned to Grayson. Inspector, we must find the lock that fits the key. It holds the final piece, I am certain. And the ashes. Analyze them further. The truth, it is close. The rain continued to fall, and Marwood Hall seemed to shudder under the weight of its secrets as Poirot's little gray cells drew ever closer to the killer's identity.
Chapter 9. The Trap. The relentless rain had transformed the grounds of Marwood Hall into a sodden quagmire, mirroring the murky tangle of secrets within its walls. The drawing room, once a bastion of polite civility, now hummed with a palpable tension, as though the very air anticipated a reckoning. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated by the fire, felt his pulse quicken as he watched Hercule Poirot prepare to tighten the net around the suspects. Poirot, his small frame radiating an almost theatrical authority, stood before the assembled guests, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of a hunter closing in on his prey. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice resonant yet measured. We approach the moment of truth. The clues, the lipstick, the note, the list, the ashes, the key, they form a pattern, a tapestry woven by a murderer who believes they can outwit Hercule Poirot. But I have set a trap, and tonight the truth will be caught. The guests, their faces etched with a mix of dread and anticipation, sat in uneasy silence. Lady Eleanor's hands trembled as she clutched her shawl, her eyes fixed on Poirot. Clara, her pale face streaked with the remnants of tears, seemed to shrink into her chair. Sir Reginald's scowl had softened into a weary resignation, while Dr. Mortimer's scholarly composure was fraying at the edges. Mrs. Mortimer, her earlier confession of blackmail hanging over her, avoided her husband's gaze. Julian Travers, his sharp features taut, gripped the arm of his chair, while Victor Crane's coarse demeanor was undercut by a nervous fidgeting. Beatrice Langley, her embroidery forgotten, clasped her hands tightly, her lips moving in silent prayer. Inspector Grayson, standing by the door with his notebook, exchanged a glance with Poirot. "We've made progress, Poirot," he said, his voice clipped. "The ashes in the library fireplace. Our men recovered fragments. The handwriting matches the list, and one fragment mentions a promise broken. Any thoughts?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "A promise broken, Inspector? Most revealing. It suggests a betrayal, a debt, not of money, but of trust. We are close, very close. But first, let us test the alibis once more." He turned to the group, his tone calm but commanding. "Last night, I asked for your movements. and lies have surfaced. Tonight, I ask for the truth. Know it. You were whispering about Lionel, about settling things. Dr. Mortimer's face darkened. Lavinia, enough. You've already admitted to hiding things from me. How can we trust you? Poirot raised a hand, silencing the escalating voices. Calm yourselves. The truth. It is not found in accusations, but in facts. Madame Mortimer, you visited Monsieur Lionel's room at 11:30 and found him dead. Why did you not raise the alarm? Her eyes welled with tears. I was terrified, Monsieur Poirot. I thought someone would think I did it. I ran back to my room and pretended I'd been there all night. Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Sir Reginald. And you, Sir Reginald, burned a letter in the library. A letter about Mademoiselle Clara's inheritance. Why destroy it if it was, as you say, nonsense? Sir Reginald's shoulders slumped, his voice low. It wasn't nonsense. Lionel had evidence, documents suggesting Clara's mother, my first wife, wasn't legally married to me. If true, it would have ruined Clara's claim to the estate. I burned it to protect her. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Father, is that true? Am I not legitimate? Lady Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand. Clara, darling, it's not true. Lionel was grasping at straws, trying to cause trouble. Your father did what he thought was right. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A motive, Sir Reginald, for murder, perhaps. To silence your brother's claims. Sir Reginald's face reddened. I didn't kill him. I burned the letter, yes, but I was in my study when he died. Poirot turned to Beatrice Langley, whose prayers had ceased, her face pale but resolute. Mademoiselle Langley, you saw Monsieur Travers and Madame Mortimer in the library, whispering of a plan. Did you hear anything else? Anything that might clarify this promise broken? Beatrice hesitated, her voice trembling. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but I heard Mr. Travers say he can't hold it over us forever. I thought it was about business, but now I'm not sure. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Merci, mademoiselle. Your words, they tighten the net. He paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the rug. Let us consider the clues anew. The lipstick on the glass. No one claims it, yet it suggests a woman's presence. The note in the cigarette case. Midnight, the library. Point reveal themselves. Hastings, his heart pounding, leaned toward Poirot. A trap, Poirot. What have you done? Poirot's voice was a whisper. I have placed a letter in the library, mon ami. A letter that claims to reveal the murderer's identity. It is locked in a drawer, with a duplicate key hidden nearby. The murderer, they will be tempted to retrieve it, to destroy it, and we shall be watching. Grayson's eyes widened. Risky, Poirot. If they take the bait, we'll have them. But if they don't, they will, Poirot said, his tone certain. The murderer, they are confident, but they are also afraid. Fear drives mistakes. He turned back to the guests, his voice rising. I ask you now to retire to your rooms, but know this. Hercule Poirot watches, and the truth cannot hide. The trap is set, and by morning,
We shall have our answer." As the guests dispersed, their faces a mixture of fear and suspicion, Poirot and Grayson positioned themselves in the library, hidden behind a heavy curtain. Hastings, stationed in the corridor, felt his nerves taut as a bowstring. The house was silent, save for the rain and the occasional creak of settling wood. At precisely 11:15, a shadow moved in the corridor. Hastings held his breath as a figure slipped into the library, their movements swift and furtive. The faint click of a drawer opening echoed, followed by the rustle of paper. Poirot and Grayson emerged from their hiding place, the light of a lantern revealing the figure. "Madame Mortimer." Poirot's voice was sharp, cutting through the darkness. Mrs. Mortimer froze, the letter in her hand, her face a mask of terror. I wasn't going to destroy it. I just wanted to see." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "To see, madame? Or to ensure your secret remains hidden? Explain yourself." She collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "It wasn't me. I swear, I didn't kill Lionel. But he knew about my past, a scandal, years ago. I thought this letter might expose me further. I had to know." Grayson stepped forward, his voice stern. "You're in deep, Mrs. Mortimer. This doesn't look good." Poirot raised a hand. "Not so fast, Inspector. Madame Mortimer. She has fallen into the trap. But is she the murderer, or merely a pawn in a larger game?" The rain pounded against the windows, and Marwood Hall seemed to hold its breath as the trap closed and the truth drew nearer. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The library of Marwood Hall was shrouded in shadows, down like the storm outside. Inspector Grayson, his notebook at the ready, stood beside Poirot, his expression a mixture of skepticism and anticipation. "Madame Mortimer," Poirot said, his voice calm but resonant. "You have fallen into the trap set by Hercule Poirot. You sought to retrieve a letter you believed would expose you. But this letter, it is a fabrication, a bait to draw out the guilty. Yet your actions, they speak of fear, of secrets. Explain, s'il vous plaît, why you felt compelled to act." Mrs. Mortimer's sobs subsided, replaced by a desperate urgency. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I didn't kill Lionel. He was blackmailing me over a scandal from my past, a foolish affair before I married Henry. I thought the letter might reveal it, ruin me. I had to see it, to protect myself." Dr. Mortimer, who had been summoned to the library, stared at his wife, his face a mask of betrayal. "Lavinia, you kept this from me, even after all we've been through." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough, Doctor. Madame Mortimer, your fear, it is understandable, but it does not make you the murderer. No, the trap has revealed much, but it is not the final piece. The truth, it lies in the clues we have gathered, and now Hercule Poirot will lay them bare." He turned to the door, addressing the constable who had gathered the other guests. "Bring them in, s'il vous plaît. It is time for the truth to be revealed." The guests filed into the library, their faces a gallery of dread and curiosity. Lady Eleanor, clutching Clara's hand, looked frail under the weight of the ordeal. Clara's eyes were red-rimmed, her expression haunted. Sir Reginald's bluster had vanished, replaced by a weary resignation. Julian Travers, his sharp features taut, avoided eye contact, while Victor Crane's coarse demeanor was tempered by a nervous fidgeting. Beatrice Langley, her prayers silent, clutched her shawl tightly. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the rug, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs,"
he began. A man is dead, poisoned by cyanide in his own room. The clues, the lipstick, the note, the list, the ashes, the key, the mark in the dust. They have led us through a maze of lies. But now, the little gray cells have found the path. Listen, and I shall explain how Lionel Ashbourne met his end. He paused, letting the tension build, his eyes sweeping the room. First, the crime. Monsieur Lionel was poisoned between 10 and 11:47, when Lady Eleanor found him. The same ink as the list, which named all of you with debt beside Monsieur Lionel's name. The ashes in the fireplace, they spoke of a promise broken. These are not random, but deliberate. He turned to the key, retrieved from under the bed. The key, it unlocks a small box, found this evening in Monsieur Lionel's luggage. A box containing letters, documents of blackmail. Monsieur Lionel, he was not a victim of chance. He was a blackmailer, holding secrets over many of you. A murmur rippled through the room. Clara's hand tightened on her mother's, while Mrs. Mortimer's face paled further. Travers's jaw clenched, and Crane shifted uncomfortably. Poirot continued, his voice rising. Let us reconstruct the night. At 9:30, Sir Reginald argued with Lionel over family finances. At 10, Madame Mortimer saw him, clutching his cigarette case, nervous. At 10:15, Dr. Mortimer spoke to him, noting his agitation. At 10:20, Madame Mortimer was in the East Wing, near his room. At 10:45, Monsieur Travers was in the library, seen by Annie. At 10:50, Annie found the cyanide vial near Lionel's door. At 11, Mademoiselle Langley heard heavy footsteps. And at 11:30, Madame Mortimer found him dead. He paused, his gaze piercing. The alibis, they overlap, but there is a gap, a moment when the murderer acted. The key is the second glass, removed to hide the poison's delivery. The lipstick, it was a distraction, applied by the murderer to suggest a woman's involvement. But the true clue is the note. Midnight, the library. It was not Lionel's plan, but the murderer's. He turned to Julian Travers, whose face had gone ashen. Monsieur Travers, you lied about your movements. You were in the library, planning to meet Lionel at midnight, but you were also near his room at 10:50. You wrote the note, to lure him to the library, where you could confront him. Travers leapt to his feet. That's preposterous. I didn't write any note. I was in the billiard room. Poirot's voice cut through like a blade. No, monsieur. The ink on the note matches the pen in your room found this evening. You were Lionel's solicitor, privy to his secrets. He was blackmailing you, was he not? Over a case you mishandled, a client you betrayed. You letter from your former client detailing your misconduct. Lionel kept it, and you knew it. You killed him to protect your reputation. Travers lunged forward, but Grayson seized him, pinning his arms. That's enough, Travers. You're coming with us. The room erupted in chaos. Clara's sobs, Lady Eleanor's cries, Sir Reginald's muttered curses. Mrs. Mortimer clung to her husband, who stood rigid, his face a mask of shock. Beatrice Langley whispered a prayer, while Crane stared at the floor, his fists clenched. Poirot raised his hands, restoring order. The trap
It has closed. Monsieur Travers, your lies, your movements, your motive, they betray you. The little gray cells, they do not err. As Grayson led Travers away, Hastings leaned toward Poirot, his voice low. Good Lord, Poirot, you had me fooled. I thought Mrs. Mortimer was the key. Poirot's eyes twinkled. A red herring, mon ami. Madame Mortimer, she was guilty of fear, but not of murder. Travers, he played a dangerous game and lost. The rain continued to fall, but the library seemed lighter, as though the truth had lifted a shadow from Marwood Hall. Yet Hastings sensed that Poirot's work was not yet done, for the little gray cells never rested until every secret was laid bare. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The storm that had battered Marwood Hall for days had finally begun to relent, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the windows. The library, where Hercule Poirot had just unveiled Julian Travers as the murderer of Lionel Ashburn, was bathed in a muted, silvery light, as though the house itself exhaled a sigh of relief. Yet the air remained heavy with the aftershocks of revelation, the guests' faces a tableau of shock, relief, and lingering unease. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fire, felt the weight of the case lift, but his mind still buzzed with questions. Poirot, his small frame poised with quiet dignity, stood at the center of the room, his green eyes reflecting a calm satisfaction. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot said, his voice soft yet resonant, the truth has been uncovered, the murderer unmasked. Monsieur Travers, he sought to silence Monsieur Lionel's blackmail with poison, but the little gray cells, they have prevailed. Yet before I depart, there is a need for reflection. A moment to understand why such a tragedy came to pass. Lady Eleanor, her composure partially restored, clasped Clara's hand, her eyes glistening with gratitude. Monsieur Poirot, you have saved us from a nightmare. How can we ever thank you? Poirot bowed slightly, his mustache twitching. Madame, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to restore order where chaos reigns. The thanks.
But his tone remained precise. Mademoiselle Clara, your uncle, he was a man consumed by his own weaknesses. The debts he owed, money to Monsieur Crane, secrets to others, they drove him to desperation. But desperation, it is a mirror that reflects the flaws of the heart. Monsieur Lionel chose to wield secrets as weapons, and in doing so, he invited his own doom. Inspector Grayson, who had returned after securing Travers in the custody of Constable Hargreaves, nodded thoughtfully. You've a way of cutting to the core, Poirot. Travers' motive was clear. Lionel's blackmail threatened his career, his life. But the planning, the cyanide, it was cold-blooded. Poirot inclined his head. Oui, Inspector. The murder? It was not a crime of passion, but of calculation. Monsieur Travers, he saw no other way to escape the net of Lionel's threats. The lipstick on the glass, the note in the cigarette case, the list. These were his attempts to muddy the waters, to cast suspicion elsewhere. But the truth, it is like a diamond. It shines through the dust. Hastings, unable to contain his curiosity, leaned forward. Poirot, how did you know it was Travers? The clues pointed in so many directions. Mrs. Mortimer, Sir Reginald, even Crane. What made you certain? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Mon ami, it is the method of Hercule Poirot to see the pattern where others see only chaos. The clues, they were many, but they converged on Monsieur Travers. The ink on the note and the list, it matched his pen. His movements, seen in the library, near Lionel's room, contradicted his alibi. The cyanide vial, dropped in haste, pointed to someone with access to such a substance. And as a solicitor,
Monsieur Travers had connections to those who deal in dangerous things. But most of all, it was his fear. The fear in his eyes when I spoke of the key. He knew it unlocked the box of letters, the evidence of his betrayal. Dr. Mortimer, his scholarly air subdued by the weight of his wife's confession, spoke up. And Lavinia, her lies, her secrets, what was her part in this? Poirot's gaze was gentle but unflinching. Madame Mortimer, she was a victim of Lionel's blackmail, as were others. Her fear drove her to conceal her visit to his room, to seek the decoy letter in the library. But her actions, they were those of a frightened woman, not a murderer. The true killer, he acted with precision, not panic. Mrs. Mortimer, her face pale, whispered, "I'm so sorry, Henry. I should have told you everything." Dr. Mortimer took her hand, his voice soft. "We'll sort it out, Lavinia, together." Poirot turned to say,
Tragedy could have been averted. Sir Reginald nodded, his voice gruff. I thought I was doing right by her. Lionel was always stirring trouble. Clara, her voice trembling, added, I wish I'd known what he was doing. Maybe I could have stopped him. Poirot shook his head. Non, mademoiselle. The path of blackmail, it is a solitary one. Monsieur Lionel chose it, and Monsieur Travers chose to end it. The fault lies with them, not with you. Beatrice Langley, her prayers now silent, spoke softly. Monsieur Poirot, you've brought light to this darkness, but what of the list? The debt beside Lionel's name. Was it all Travers' doing? Poirot nodded. The list. It was a clever ruse by Monsieur Travers to implicate others. He wrote it, burned part of it to suggest a struggle, but left enough to sow confusion. The word debt. It was not just money, but the debts of trust, of loyalty, that Lionel exploited. Travers used this to his advantage, but he underestimated Hercule Poirot. Victor Crane, his coarse features softened by relief, grunted. Lionel had it coming, if you ask me, but I didn't want it to end like this. Poirot's gaze was stern. Monsieur Crane, your debt with Lionel. It was financial, but it fueled his desperation. Each of you, in your way, contributed to the storm that broke here. But the act of murder, that belongs to Travers alone. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. The lesson, mes amis, is this. Secrets, they are like poison. They corrode, they destroy. To live in truth, it is the only way to find peace. Lady Eleanor rose, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Monsieur Poirot, you have our deepest gratitude. Will you stay another day, to rest? Poirot bowed, his smile warm but distant. Merci, madame, but my work here is done. The truth is restored, and Hercule Poirot must move on. There are other puzzles, other shadows that require my attention. As the guests dispersed, their steps lighter but their hearts heavy, Hastings followed Poirot to the corridor. You've done it again, Poirot, he said, a note of awe in his voice. But it feels unfinished, somehow. All those secrets, all that pain. Poirot adjusted his hat, his expression serene. Mon ami, life, it is never finished. The human heart, it carries its burdens always. But we, relentless pursuit of truth, would light the way. Chapter 12. The Unraveling Threads. The faint sunlight that had pierced the clouds over Marwood Hall had vanished by midday.
replaced by a lingering mist that clung to the estate like a shroud. Inside, the atmosphere was one of uneasy calm. The revelation of Julian Travers as Lionel Ashbourne's murderer, having lifted a weight but left behind a tangle of unresolved questions. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the drawing room with a cup of tepid tea, felt a restless energy, as though the case, though solved, had left threads dangling in the wind. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit a stark contrast to the somber mood, stood by the window, his sharp green eyes scanning the mist as if it held the answers to questions unasked. "Mon ami," Poirot said, turning to Hastings with a faint smile. "You are troubled, no? The murderer is caught, the truth revealed, yet you sense something incomplete. The little gray cells. They whisper to you too, perhaps." Hastings set down his cup, his brow furrowed. "I suppose so, Poirot. Travers killed Lionel, that's clear enough. But the secrets, the blackmail, the burned letters, Clara's inheritance. It feels like there's more to it. Why did Lionel turn to blackmail? And that key, the box, did we miss something?" Poirot's mustache twitched, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "You are learning, Hastings. The case, it is solved. But the human heart, it is a labyrinth. There are threads yet to be woven into the tapestry. Come, let us tie them up before we depart." The guests, summoned once more to the drawing room, gathered with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Lady Eleanor, her face drawn but composed, sat beside Clara, whose eyes were still red from crying. Sir Reginald, his earlier bluster replaced by a weary silence, stared into the fire. Dr. and Mrs. Mortimer sat apart, their reconciliation tentative, her confession of past indiscretions hanging between them. Victor Crane, his coarse features softened by the resolution of the case, sipped a glass of brandy, while Beatrice Langley, her prayers resumed, clutched her rosary beads. Inspector Grayson entered, his lean frame taut with purpose. "Poirot, we've secured Travers for transport to the station. He's admitted to the blackmail but still denies the murder. Says he was framed, that someone else planted the vial and the note." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Framed, you say? A desperate claim, Inspector, but one we must consider. The mind of a murderer, it is slippery, no? Let Monsieur Travers. Or does another hand linger in the shadows?" Lady Eleanor's voice was soft but firm. "Monsieur Poirot, you've done so much already. Must we dig deeper? The pain of Lionel's actions. It's enough." Poirot's gaze was gentle but unyielding. "Madame, the truth. It is a balm, even when it stings. Let us examine the box once more. Inspector, you have it?" Grayson nodded, producing a small locked box from Lionel's luggage, its surface worn but sturdy. The key, found under the bed, fit perfectly, and Poirot opened it with a click. Inside were several letters, their edges yellowed, their contents a litany of secrets. Mrs. Mortimer's scandal, Travers' professional misconduct, and a document questioning Clara's inheritance. But one letter, tucked at the bottom, caught Poirot's eye. A letter addressed to Lionel from a man named Carver, the moneylender Sir Reginald had mentioned. Poirot unfolded it, his eyes scanning the sharp, angular handwriting. "Listen, mes amis," he said, reading aloud. "Ashbourne, you've dodged me long enough. The £10,000 is due, and I know your game. Pay by month's end, or your family secrets see the light." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's why Uncle Lionel was so desperate. He was trapped." Poirot nodded.
Oui, mademoiselle. Monsieur Lionel, he was a man caught in a vice. Debts to Carver, debts to Crane, and secrets he wielded to buy time. But this letter, it is not all. There is another, written by Monsieur Lionel himself. He produced a second sheet, its ink fresher, its tone frantic. To whom it may concern, Poirot read. I am surrounded by vipers. They think they can hide, but I know their sins. If I die, let it be known. The truth is in the box. The room fell silent, the weight of Lionel's words settling like dust. Hastings leaned forward, his voice low. Good heavens, Poirot, he knew he was in danger, but from whom besides Travers? Poirot's smile was grim. From many, mon ami. Monsieur Lionel, he played a dangerous game, blackmailing those around him. But let us consider the list once more. The word debt. It was not just Travers' invention. It was Lionel's own, a ledger of those he held in his power. He turned to Victor Crane, whose brandy glass paused midway to his lips. Monsieur Crane, you admitted Lionel owed you 10,000 pounds. Did he also threaten you with secrets? Crane's face darkened, his voice gruff. He tried. Said he knew about a deal I made years ago. Shady, but legal. I told him to shove it.
Monsieur Lionel threaten you as well?
Dr. Mortimer's jaw tightened. He hinted at it, yes. Said he had proof of Lavinia's affair. I told him it didn't matter. She's my wife. I had no reason to kill him. Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Beatrice Langley. Mademoiselle Langley, you saw much, yet spoke little. Did Monsieur Lionel hold a secret over you? Beatrice's hands trembled, her voice barely audible.
He knew about my brother, a scandal in our family. I begged him to stay quiet, but I didn't hurt him.
Poirot's expression softened. I believe you, mademoiselle. Your heart, it is too gentle for murder. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. The threads, they come together. Monsieur Lionel, he was a man drowning in his own schemes. Monsieur Travers, he saw no way out but murder. The cyanide, the note, the list, they were his tools. But the box, it was Lionel's legacy of betrayal. Lady Eleanor spoke, her voice trembling. Monsieur Poirot, will this haunt us forever? Lionel's actions, they've torn us apart. Poirot bowed slightly. Madam, the wounds, they will heal. But only with time and truth. You must face what has been revealed, but you are not alone. As the guests dispersed, their steps heavy with the burden of truth, Hastings followed Poirot to the corridor. It's over, Poirot, he said, but it feels like the hall itself is stained with this tragedy. Poirot adjusted his hat, his smile serene. Mon ami, every house has its shadows, but the light of truth, it cleanses. We have done our part. Now, let us prepare to leave this place. The mist outside had begun to lift, and Marwood Hall stood silent, its secrets unraveled, its wounds laid bare. Poirot's little gray cells had triumphed, but Hastings knew the echoes of this case would linger long after they departed. Chapter 13. The Hidden Motive. The mist that had cloaked Marwood Hall for days had finally begun to dissipate, revealing patches of pale sky above the Sussex countryside. Inside, the great house seemed to breathe more freely, as though the unmasking of Julian Travers as Lionel Ashbourne's murderer had lifted a suffocating veil. Yet for Captain Arthur Hastings, A nagging sense of unease persisted, like an itch he couldn't quite scratch. The case was solved, the clues explained, but something about the neatness of the resolution troubled him. Blackmail, the box of letters, the promise broken, in the ashes. It feels like there's another layer, something we've missed. Why was Lionel so desperate to collect these secrets? And why now? Poirot's eyes gleamed, his fingers steepled. You have the instinct of a detective, Hastings, though you lack the method. The little gray cells, they too have been whispering of a deeper truth. The case, it is not quite closed. There is a motive, a hidden motive that drove Monsieur Lionel to his schemes, and perhaps another hand that stirred the pot. The guest, summoned once more to the drawing room, gathered with a mixture of weariness and apprehension. Lady Eleanor, her face etched with exhaustion, sat beside Clara, whose fragile composure seemed ready to shatter. Sir Reginald, his earlier defiance reduced to a quiet slump, stared at his hands. Dr. and Mrs. Mortimer sat together, their reconciliation strained but holding. Victor Crane, his coarse features softened by the resolution, sipped a glass of brandy, while Beatrice Langley, her rosary beads clicking softly, murmured prayers. Inspector Grayson entered, his lean frame taut with purpose. Poirot, we've interrogated Travers further. He's sticking to his story, admits to the blackmail but swears he didn't kill Lionel, says the cyanide vial was planted, and he claims someone else knew about the box of letters. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Planted, you say? A bold claim, Inspector. But let us explore this. The box. It contains secrets that threatened many in this room, yet why did Monsieur Lionel collect them? And why did he choose this weekend to press his demands? He turned to the group, his voice calm but commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, the case of Monsieur Lionel's murder is solved, yet a question remains. What drove him to blackmail? The letters in the box, they speak of personal betrayals. But there is a larger story, no? I ask you now, who among you knew of Monsieur Lionel's connection to this man Carver, the moneylender? Sir Reginald's head snapped up, his face reddening. I told you, Poirot. Lionel owed Carver money, £10,000, that's all I know. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. All, Sir Reginald? I think not. The letter from Carver, it hinted at more than money, a threat to expose family secrets. What were these secrets, and why did they drive Lionel to such extremes? Lady Eleanor's hands trembled, her voice barely audible. Monsieur Poirot, please, we've suffered enough. Lionel's actions were his own. Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone was firm. Madame, the truth, it is a bitter medicine, but it heals. Speak, or the shadow will—
With Carver. Not just as a debtor, but personally. He claimed it could ruin our family's name. Sir Reginald's face paled, his voice hoarse. That's nonsense. Your mother was a good woman, Clara. Lionel was lying to manipulate you. Poirot's mustache twitched. Or perhaps, Sir Reginald, he spoke a half-truth. The letter from Carver, it mentioned a promise broken. I suspect this was not just about money, but a betrayal. A promise between Lionel and Carver, perhaps, from years past. He produced the box of letters, opening it with the small key. Among the documents was a faded photograph tucked beneath the letters, showing a younger Lionel with a man whose sharp features matched the description of a moneylender, Carver. They stood together, their expressions tense, a contract visible in Lionel's hand.
This photograph, Poirot said, holding it up. It tells a story. Monsieur Lionel and Carver. They were partners once, no? A business venture, perhaps, that went sour. Carver held this over Lionel, and Lionel, in turn, held secrets over you all, to raise the funds, to appease him. Victor Crane's voice rumbled. So Lionel was desperate because of Carver? That's why he was squeezing me for my 10,000? Poirot nodded. Oui, monsieur, but there is more. The promise broken in the ashes. It was not just Travers' invention. It was Lionel's own warning, a note he wrote to protect himself. He knew someone in this house was dangerous, someone who would kill to keep their secret. He turned to Dr. Mortimer, whose scholarly air was strained. Doctor, you were close to Lionel. Did he ever speak of Carver? Or of this photograph? Dr. Mortimer hesitated, his eyes flicking to his wife. He mentioned Carver once, years ago. Said they'd had a falling out over a deal. I didn't think it mattered until now. Mrs. Mortimer's voice was sharp. Henry, you never told me this. Was Lionel using you too? Dr. Mortimer shook his head. He tried, Lavinia, but I told him to keep his threats. I had nothing to hide, except your past, which I already knew. Poirot's gaze shifted to Beatrice Langley, whose prayers had ceased. Mademoiselle Langley, you saw much in this house. Did you ever see this photograph, or hear of Carver? Beatrice's hands trembled, her voice protect his own secret. The Lionel's actions, they were the spark. The box, the photograph, the ashes. They tell the story of a man who lost himself to greed and fear. Lady Eleanor rose, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Monsieur Poirot, will this Carver come for us now? Are we still in danger? Poirot bowed slightly. Madame Carver, he is a shadow in London, not here. With Travers' arrest and the box in our hands, his power over your family is broken. You are free, if you choose to be. As the guests dispersed, their faces heavy with the weight of truth, Hastings followed Poirot to the corridor. It's a grim tale, Poirot, he said. Lionel brought this on himself, didn't he? Poirot adjusted his tie, his expression serene. Oui, mon ami. The human heart. It builds its own traps. But we have untangled the threads. Let us prepare to leave this place of shadows. The mist outside was lifting, and Marwood Hall stood silent, its secrets exposed, its wounds beginning to heal. Poirot's little gray cells had prevailed, but the echoes of Lionel's hidden motive lingered, a reminder of the cost of buried truths. Chapter 14. The Final Threads. The mist that had shrouded Marwood Hall had nearly vanished by late afternoon, replaced by a tentative sunlight that bathed the estate in a golden glow. The oppressive weight of Lionel Ashbourne's murder and the unmasking of Julian Travers as the culprit had left the household in a state of fragile recovery. Yet, for Captain Arthur Hastings, a lingering sense of incompletion gnawed at him, as though the case, though solved, held one final secret waiting to be uncovered. Hercule Poirot, standing in the grand hall with his suitcase neatly packed, adjusted his hat with a precise flick, his sharp green eyes scanning the surroundings as if to ensure no detail had been overlooked. Mon ami, Poirot said,
turning to Hastings with a serene smile. You are still troubled, no? The murderer is caught, the motives revealed, yet you feel the tapestry is not complete. The little gray cells, they sense a final thread, perhaps. Hastings, his coat draped over his arm, nodded slowly. It feels too tidy, Poirot. Lionel's blackmail, Travers' murder, the connection to Carver. It all fits. But why did Lionel choose this weekend to push everyone to the edge? And that photograph with Carver, there's something personal there, isn't there? Poirot's mustache twitched, his expression one of quiet approval. You are perceptive, Hastings. The case it is solved.
Weariness sat beside Clara, whose fragile composure had begun to strengthen. Sir Reginald, his bluster replaced by a quiet introspection, leaned against the mantelpiece. Dr. and Mrs. Mortimer, their reconciliation tentative but growing, sat close, their hands entwined. Victor Crane, his coarse demeanor softened, sipped a glass of brandy, while Beatrice Langley, her rosary beads silent, gazed at Poirot with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Inspector Grayson entered, his notebook tucked under his arm. Poirot, Travers is en route to the station. He's still claiming he was framed, but the evidence, the ink, the vial, the letters, it's airtight. Anything else you need before you go? Poirot inclined his head. One final matter, Inspector. The case, it is closed, but there is a question that lingers. Why did Monsieur Lionel choose this weekend to press his blackmail? The photograph with Carver, the letter about a promise broken, they suggest a personal vendetta, no? Let us explore this, to ensure no shadow remains. He turned to the group, his voice clear and commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, you have endured much, and the truth has been revealed. Monsieur Travers killed Monsieur Lionel to protect his secrets, driven by the blackmail that threatened his career. But there is a deeper question. What drove Monsieur Lionel to such extremes? The photograph with Carver, the moneylender, it is not just a business deal gone sour. It is personal. Oui? Lady Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap, her voice soft. Monsieur Poirot, must we revisit this pain? Lionel's actions have torn us apart. Let it rest. Poirot's gaze was gentle but unrelenting. Madame, the truth. It is the only path to peace. The photograph. It shows Monsieur Lionel and Carver in a moment of tension, a contract between them. But there is more. A letter in the box, one I have not yet shared. He produced the small box, unlocking it with the key found under Lionel's bed. From it, he withdrew a folded letter, its edges worn but intact. The handwriting was Lionel's, its tone anguished. Listen, mes amis, Poirot said, reading aloud. To my family, if I am gone. Carver was my friend once, my partner in a venture that promised wealth. But he betrayed me, took everything, and left me with nothing but shame. I swore to reclaim what was mine, even if it meant using your secrets. Forgive me. Clara's eyes widened. Dead. But not that it was personal. Why didn't he come to me? Poirot's expression softened. Pride, Sir Reginald. Monsieur Lionel, he was a man consumed by it. He could not bear to admit his failure, so he turned to blackmail, believing it would save him. But it only tightened the noose. Dr. Mortimer spoke up, his scholarly air returning. So, Carver's threat pushed Lionel to blackmail us, and Travers killed him to stop it. It's a chain of desperation. Précisément, Poirot said. Each of you,
You are caught in this chain. Madame Mortimer, your past scandal. Monsieur Crane, your financial claim. Mademoiselle Langley, your family shame. Sir Reginald, the threat to Clara's inheritance. Each a link, forged by Lionel's desperation.
Victor Crane set down his glass, his voice gruff. I should have known Lionel was in deeper than he let on. I pushed him hard for that money, but I didn't want him dead. Beatrice Langley's voice was soft. He was so lost, wasn't he? I saw it in his eyes, but I didn't understand. Poirot's gaze swept the room. Monsieur Lionel, he was a man adrift, driven by a past he could not escape. The photograph, the letter, they reveal a man who sought redemption, but chose the wrong path. Monsieur Travers, he saw no other way but murder. The final thread, it is this. Betrayal begets betrayal, and only truth can break the cycle. Lady Eleanor rose, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Monsieur Poirot, you've given us clarity, though it's a bitter gift. Will Carver come for us now? Poirot shook his head. No, madame. The box, it is in the hands of the law. Carver's power, it is broken. You must rebuild, with honesty as your foundation. As the guests dispersed, their steps lighter but their hearts heavy, Hastings followed Poirot to the grand hall, where their carriage awaited. It's a tragic story, Poirot, he said. Lionel's betrayal by Carver, his own betrayals, Travers' murder, it's all so human. Poirot adjusted his gloves, his smile serene. Oui, mon ami, the human heart, it is both the puzzle and the solution. We have unraveled the threads, and now we leave Marwood Hall to heal. The sunlight outside was strengthening, casting long shadows across the drive. Marwood Hall stood silent, its secrets laid bare, its wounds exposed to the light. Poirot's little gray cells had triumphed, and as the carriage rolled away, Hastings felt a quiet certainty that the final threads had been woven into a truth that would endure. Chapter 15. The Departure. The sun had finally broken through the clouds over Marwood Hall, casting a golden warmth across the Sussex country. Stood on the gravel drive, his suitcase at his feet, watching as the servants loaded the carriage with an efficiency that belied the turmoil of the past days. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his tailored coat and polished shoes, adjusted his hat with a precise flick, his green eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction. Mon ami, Poirot said, turning to Hastings with a gentle smile. You are pensive, no? The case is closed, the truth unveiled. Yet your heart, it lingers on the pain of Marwood Hall. Is it not so? Hastings nodded, his expression somber. I can't help it, Poirot. Travers is in custody. Lionel's motives are clear, and the family's secrets are out in the open. But it's all so tragic. Lionel's desperation, Carver's betrayal, the lives torn apart. It feels like a wound that won't fully heal. Poirot's mustache twitched, his voice soft but firm. The human heart, Hastings, it is both fragile and resilient. The wounds, they will scar, but the family, they will endure. We have done our part, brought order to chaos, light to darkness. That is the work of Hercule Poirot. The great oak doors of the hall opened, and Lady Eleanor emerged, followed by Clara and Sir Reginald. The family, though weary, carried themselves with a newfound resolve. Lady Eleanor's silver hair caught the sunlight, and her eyes, though tired, held a spark of gratitude. Clara, her fragile beauty strengthened by the truth, managed a small smile. Sir Reginald, his bluster replaced by a quiet dignity, extended a hand to Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice gruff but sincere. You've saved us from a darkness I didn't fully grasp. We owe you more than words can express." Poirot bowed slightly, his hand touching his heart. "Monsieur, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to serve the truth. Your family, it has faced its shadows. Now you must build anew, with honesty as your cornerstone." Clara stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "Monsieur Poirot, I was so afraid of what Uncle Lionel's secrets would do to us, but you've given us a chance to start over. Thank you." Poirot's gaze softened, his smile warm. "Mademoiselle Clara, the truth. It is a heavy burden, but it frees the soul. You are young, and your heart is strong. Carry it forward with courage." Lady Eleanor clasped Poirot's hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "Will you not stay another day, Monsieur Poirot? The hall feels lighter with you here." Poirot shook his head, his expression serene. "Non, madame. My work is dead." Mortimer, her vivacity subdued but not extinguished, added, "I was so afraid of my past coming to light, but you've shown me that truth, however painful, is better than secrets."
Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, the past, it shapes us, but it does not define us. You and your husband, you have chosen to face it. That is strength." Victor Crane, lingering near the steps, gave a curt nod.
"Didn't think much of you at first, Poirot, with your fancy ways. But you got the job done. Lionel owed me, but I'm glad it's over."
Poirot's smile was enigmatic.
Monsieur Crane, the debt, it is settled in the only way it could be. Let it teach you the value of trust over gold."
Beatrice Langley, her rosary beads tucked away, approached last, her face serene.
"Monsieur Poirot, you brought peace to this house. My prayers, they were answered through you."
Poirot bowed deeply.
Mademoiselle, faith and reason, they are not so different. Both seek the truth, and we have found it together.
Inspector Grayson, who had overseen the loading of the carriage, joined them, his lean face etched with respect.
"Poirot, I'll admit I doubted you at first. But your methods, they're something else. Travers is headed for trial, and the evidence is solid. Anything else you need before you go?"
Poirot's eyes twinkled.
No, Inspector. The little grey cells, they are satisfied. The box, the letters, the photograph, they are in your hands. Ensure they are used wisely.
Grayson nodded, tipping his hat.
"You have my word. Safe travels, Poirot."
As the carriage rolled down the drive, Hastings gazed back at Marwood Hall, its towers rising proudly against the clearing sky. "It's a strange feeling, Poirot," he said, "leaving a place like this. So much pain, yet so much hope now." Poirot adjusted his gloves, his voice reflective.
Mon ami, life, it is a balance of pain and hope. We are but the weavers of truth, threading the needle through the fabric of human folly. Marwood Hall, it will heal, but it will not forget.
The carriage rattled along, the countryside unfolding in shades of green and gold. Hastings leaned back, his mind replaying the case, the shattered glass, the cryptic note, the list, the photograph, the hidden motive of Lionel's betrayal by Carver.
"You know, Poirot,
He said,
I thought Travers was too obvious at times, with his lies and nervous glances. But you saw through it all, the web of secrets, the chain of betrayals."
Poirot's smile was serene.
The obvious, Hastings, it is often the mask of the truth. Monsieur Travers, he played his part well, but the little grey cells, they see beyond the mask. The photograph, the letter from Carver, they were the keys to Lionel's desperate...
Twinkled. "A common mistake, mon ami. The heart, it is swayed by emotion, but the mind, it seeks order. That is why Hercule Poirot triumphs, because I trust the method, the logic, the little grey cells." The carriage reached the main road, and Marwood Hall faded into the distance. its secrets laid bare, its wounds exposed to the healing light of truth. Hastings felt a quiet pride in his friend's brilliance, a certainty that wherever they went next, Poirot's relentless pursuit of justice would prevail. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Poirot leaned back, his hands folded neatly. "The world, it is full of puzzles, Hastings, and we shall solve them one by one." With that, the carriage rolled on, carrying them toward new mysteries, new truths, and the eternal dance of the little gray cells.